Good morning. So very glad to have you with us today. Uh, as you can see, next Sunday, Imam Ibrahim will be here with us. Today, I'm doing the presentation, but I'm very pleased that we're able to do this two-part session dealing with learning about and learning from the Qur'an. Next week, I especially hope you will be with us. This week, there are a number of people who have Mother's Day plans, and I certainly understand that. I appreciate those of you who have perhaps postponed some of those plans to be here, but this is wonderful to have you here today. The Quran is Islam's scripture. And specifically, it is the Arabic text of the Quran. I have a couple of English translations here, but the Arabic text is the standard. Now, in many senses, exactly the same thing goes on with Christianity. The Christian Bible was written originally in Hebrew, Aramaic, and Greek in various portions. And anytime theologians, church people are interested in figuring out, okay, what did the text say? Yes, you have to go to those original language sources. But in Islam, the Arabic text is so very important because in terms of their prayer life, they use the Arabic text in prayer. It is exactly the Arabic that is used. The Quran passages are what the prayer consists of in any of the 5 prayers per day that Muslims share. Things like this, in terms of a translation into English or some other language, these are always understood as being interpretations of the message of the Quran. And it's an amazing time in which we live, in which we can actually access a number of translations in our own language. There are well over 40 English translations that are easily accessible. The word Quran itself means recitation. And it's important to pay attention to that term because within the passing on of the Quran, the communal setting of prayer, the use of the Quran spoken orally was a key issue. It wasn't a matter of just a select group of people having the Arabic text that this tiny group used, but no, at every prayer service, you have the whole community sharing in that Arabic text of the Quran. In terms of size, the Quran is just a bit shorter than the Christian New Testament. It's 114 chapters long, with each of those chapters ranging from 3 verses to 286. And any particular verse can go from just 2 Arabic letters to lines and lines and lines of text. Now, these terms at the bottom are simply the terms that Muslims use for talking about how the text gets divided up. Chapters are called surahs. Verses are called ayahs. And there's actually an Arabic word for that is in the plural for each of those, but hey, rather than saying surat for plural chapters or ayat for plural verses, I'll just say ayahs, using the English form of that. Another way of dividing the text up is to divide the text into 30 roughly equal sections in length, 30 sections for the whole Qur'an. And that's set up so that during a lunar month, which is roughly 30 days, slightly less, you can read a 30th of the Quran on each day. Each juz is a 30th of the Quran. During Ramadan, which has just been experienced in the Muslim community, each evening during the month of Ramadan, it is customary, something done at AMI, of having a juz read each evening. They read a 30th of the text on each of those evenings in the evening celebration. Yes, there was a question.
Yes, at some point in my past, when I toured mosque or talked to some people there, a number of the young men there had the entire thing memorized. And I just wondered, was that because of some training, or was there an expectation for certain people to do that, or?
There is the question I was dealing with memorization of the Quran. Memorization is a very, very common kind of thing. Children 10 years of age or even younger often memorize the entire Quran. And this is not a requirement, but it's something that is encouraged. And that's something that is quite striking, okay, to memorize all of that. In Arabic, that's a very, very important thing. One of the features that really hit me square in the face dealing with the kind of expectations of mastery of the Quran. I spent considerable amount of time at a very large mosque in St. Louis a number of years ago, and I sat that they had their own school there, and I sat in on a number of classes in the school. I sat in kindergarten classes, and I sat in the little tiny chairs for the kindergarten class, but I also sat in on junior high religion classes. And one of the qualifications for someone to teach junior high religion class in a mosque school was the person had to have memorized the entire Quran. That was just a basic. And that's something that when we try shifting it into a Christian context, you think you have problems recruiting teachers. It's a striking shift in expectations. In Islam, they talk about Prophet Muhammad receiving the Quran over a 23-year period of time, starting in the year 610, when he was about 40 years of age, which continued for the next 23 years until his death in the year 632. So he died at age 63. By virtue of Prophet Muhammad receiving a scripture, he is spoken of as a messenger. Any prophet who receives a scripture and then passes that on is called a messenger. For Prophet Muhammad The Quran is described as having come down to him, which he learned and passed on through oral recitation. And it was revealed a bit at a time over that period of time. The fact of gradual revelation, rather than everything occurring at once, is an important concept within Islam. And that means that the revelation of the Quran was not something that was simply a general pronouncement to humanity or some portion of humanity that was somehow to be understood as an absolute type of thing that applied equally anytime, anywhere, but rather the coming down of the Quran was something that was viewed as being connected to human circumstances. It was intended to speak to particular kinds of situations, a very, very important concept. And these particular circumstances are spoken of in Islam as the occasions of revelation. And there's a whole field of study within Islamic studies that is dealing specifically with the occasions of revelation. So that basically every verse in the Quran, there is a set of information and a whole series of arguments about when that particular passage was revealed and what its purpose was. It is really important for Christians and other outsiders to understand that for Islam, Prophet Muhammad is never, ever, ever viewed as the author of the Quran, nor is he viewed as having been inspired to write the Quran. Those terms of being author, of being inspired, those are Christian terms that have no place whatsoever within Islam. And in fact, to refer to Prophet Muhammad as author or as one inspired to write the Quran, that's really an insult. Yes?
Can you tell us, is 610 to 632 CE, is that a specific Islamic time? Can you explain that to us? What CE is?
CE is talking about the Common Era. It's a way that academic folks, in particular, try using a somewhat neutral kind of designation rather than the explicitly Christian terms of BC and AD, before Christ, and Anno Domini, the year of our Lord. But these dates, 610 to 632, would correspond to what somebody else might speak of as the 610 to 632 AD. It's just Common Era and not making specific Christian reference in doing so. The key reason for discarding concepts of Muhammad being the author or someone who has been inspired to write is simply to underscore that God alone is understood to be the source of the Quran. That is a basic presupposition that all Muslims have. It is something that is non-negotiable. It's something in which you can't, in talking to a Muslim, say, well, if you'll just give up that idea of God alone being the source of the Quran, then we can talk. No, that's simply a given for them. And in exactly the same kind of way that somebody talking to those of us who are Christian, people would say, well, as long as you don't talk about Jesus as having any significance, okay, we can talk. Okay, no, that's just a presupposition that is there. Not only is God viewed as the source of the Quran, God is viewed as the narrator of the Quran. He's the one who is speaking throughout the Quran. When a story is told and somebody is being quoted within the story, God is the one who's telling the story. God is the one who's doing the quoting. So everything that you encounter in the Quran, as Muslims would understand it, is God speaking. And this is so much the case that when Muslims want to quote the Quran, rather than they're saying the Quran says, which they might say, but frequently they will say, God said, yada, yada, yada. Although yada, yada, yada is a Hebrew phrase. So, for Muslims, the Quran is literally the words of God. Literally the words of God. And the Quran as a whole is understood to be the word of God. That which is definitive for understanding what God is all about and what humans are all about and what everything else is all about. Now, for many Christians, and particularly UCC Christians, the word literally causes shivers to go up and down the spine. And it's very important to recognize that for Muslims, yes, the Quran is literally the words and the word of God, but this definitely does not mean that there needs to be a rigid, literal interpretation and application of those words that are literally God. Those are two different things. And it's important to understand that God can use analogies, God can use metaphors, symbols, allusions, imagery. Thus, when we encounter God's words, you have to work at figuring out what that means. And yes, the Quran, in the first few verses of the third surah, the third chapter, makes reference to this, this feature that the Quran has some things that, hey, it's very easy to say that's definitely what it means. But other things, it's figurative. Okay, you need to work on that and ultimately acknowledge that God alone knows what that means. We've got various kinds of ideas. But to understand that calling the Quran God's literal words is not the same as saying that the Quran can only be understood in one very, very narrow, one very, very narrow way. Basically, God uses human words, human language to communicate, to be understood, because otherwise humans wouldn't be able to understand anything. Okay, it has to be in the framework of how language functions. Yes.
become even more complicated when you consider the translation from Arabic to English or any other language.
Absolutely. And that's true for within Christianity as well. That's true anytime you're moving across linguistic boundaries. But yes, that's always involved. But even when working with the text that is viewed as literally being God's words, okay, there is no automatic easy way of saying, oh, obviously this means this. Yes, your point is correct.
This is what it means for me, if it might mean something different.
Yes, and there is also always the possibility that it means something different to God too.
Me, I might put my community.
Well, and that's the way humans function very frequently. And that's something that those of us who are Christians know that Christians do that. And Muslims know that Muslims do that as well. And yet being able to have a text that you can at least say, this is what it says, okay, and this is how it should be understood because of this reason. Okay, that there are arguments that can be given for doing that. And the kinds of commentaries that are present for the Qur'an, exactly the same kind of thing that happens with Christians dealing with the Bible as well. Okay, God as speaker is talking specifically to Prophet Muhammad. In the two English translations I'm toting with me today, very frequently you'll find little parenthetical square parentheses with the words, "O prophet," because the words are talking to somebody and it's hard to understand, okay, who's being addressed? But, oh, it's the prophet who's being talked to at those points. And so the text as a way of, the translated text as a way of helping readers will often try making that clear. Sometimes the text in speaking to the prophet explicitly comforts or encourages or guides or even criticizes Prophet Muhammad. And I've got three examples that I'd like to share of this. These are Qur'an passages. Muhammad's reception of the Qur'an was not a smooth, easy, constant process. There were periods of time when there were dry spells. And one of the worst dry spells for Prophet Muhammad was early in the process of receiving, in which he went for days, he went for weeks without receiving anything. And then this particular passage is one that addressed to Prophet Muhammad, which we listen in on, dealing with that. By the morning sunlight, and the night when it falls still, your Lord, O Prophet, has not abandoned you, nor has he become hateful of you. And the next life is certainly far better for you than this one. And surely your Lord will give so much to you that you will be pleased. Did he not find you as an orphan and sheltered you? Did he not find you unguided, then guided you? And did he not find you needy, then satisfied your needs? So do not oppress the orphan, nor repulse the beggar, and proclaim the blessings of your Lord. Now, I want you to notice something important about this, that in this passage, God speaking uses third-person speech to talk about God, your Lord. Did he not find you? Yeah, that's a frequent feature in the Qur'an. We'll talk more about that in a moment. One of the major obstacles that Prophet Muhammad encountered in the reception of the Quran was his contemporaries in the city of Mecca saying, "You're nuts. You're just crazy." And the prophet himself thinking, "Am I nuts? Okay, what's going on?" And here is a passage that is addressing that particular circumstance and the taunting that occurred. "Be patient, O prophet, with what they say, and depart from them courteously, and leave to me the denying, the people of luxury, and bear with them for a little while." Yes. The Prophet Muhammad is understood by Muslims to be the one who is listening to the recitation of this. And by tradition, the angel Jibril or the angel Gabriel is understood as being the one reciting this to the prophet. But the prophet is understood as learning the recitation of that and repeating things. And there are passages in the Quran that talk about his frustration in terms of trying to get the recitation right. But he recites, and then once he has the recitation right, he recites to others. And that is how the text is understood as having been passed on. But this is totally God, Muhammad, and the angel Jibril understood as being basically the wire between them. Yes.
Who is credited with reporting and writing down of the passage?
There are various companions of the prophet who are described as being ones who wrote things down. You also have these materials being shared within the prayer life of the community. 5 times a day, okay, things are being recited as prayers. And basically any verses in the Quran can be used as part of the prayers that are occurring. So it's not just private individuals doing anything, but it's something in which the community itself learns to recite the materials. It's a teaching process that occurs in a communal context and not just individual folks off on the side. There are often criticisms by non-Muslims saying, doing things orally. How could this work? Well, remember the 10-year-olds who memorize the entire Quran. Okay. Another passage, just as an example of how Prophet Muhammad ends up on the receiving end of these things. There was a situation in which Prophet Muhammad was talking with a wealthy business person in Mecca. a person who was not a follower of Prophet Muhammad. And while he was doing the talking, a blind man came up and interrupted that conversation. And here is a passage which basically chews out Prophet Muhammad for the way he responded. He frowned and turned his attention away simply because the blind man came to him interrupting. You never know, Prophet. Perhaps he may be purified, or he may be mindful, benefiting from the reminder. As for the one who was indifferent, the rich guy, you gave him your undivided attention, even though you're not to blame if he would not be purified. But as for the one who came to you eager to learn, being in awe of God, you were inattentive to him. Ouch. And the community learns to recite this. So we have some things that are directed individually to the prophet. Sometimes passages in the Qur'an are providing Muhammad with the message that he is to speak to others. But always, the assumption is that all humanity can learn and benefit from whatever the Qur'an says. I am not a Muslim. I am a Christian biblical scholar and theologian. The bag of tricks that Christian biblical scholars and theologians use, okay, that's by training, by temperament, that's simply part of what I deal with. And I deal with that whenever I pick up the Qur'an. I don't leave that behind. I have family connections and educational links to Islam, despite my being a Christian. When my son was in junior high, his linguistic gifts far exceeded mine, and he taught himself Arabic. And in junior high, he learned to deal with Arabic. In his senior year of high school, he became Muslim. Our daughter was married to a Muslim. And she was involved in raising their son as a Muslim. When she died, just a few years ago, she had a traditional Muslim funeral, a traditional Muslim burial. That's part of my connections with Islam. In both of my sabbaticals, academic sabbaticals, I spent both of those within Muslim contexts, dealing with Muslims and focusing on Christian-Muslim relationships. In my teaching classes on Islam was something that I did, and in my particular college, which had a lot of Muslim students, sometimes my Islam courses had anywhere from a third to a half of the students being Muslims from various Muslim countries around the world. I have connections there, but in dealing with the Qur'an, I am always an outsider. Always. Because the Quran is not my default position in terms of thinking about myself spiritually. I am an outsider, much as I assume most of you are outsiders to the Quran. Yet, I'm also a frequent reader of the Quran in translation. And the fact that I need to use translation underscores my being an outsider. And I am immensely appreciative of the Quran. Reading the Quran helps me better understand Muslims and Islam. It also makes me a humbler, better Christian and a humbler, better human for doing it. And reading the Quran has deepened and profoundly transformed my understanding both of the Bible and of Christianity. I know far more about the Bible and Christianity today because of the Quran than I ever did before. And that's really why I wanted to be doing this session and having Imam Ibrahim here next week to be dealing with things. Gandhi said, I hold that it is the duty of every cultured man and woman to read sympathetically the scriptures of the world. If we are to respect others' religions as we would have them respect our own, a friendly study of world's religions is a sacred duty. This is basically the invitation that I want to pass on to you today to join in that process. Well, in getting started with this, what translation to use? There are many good translations. I prefer a modern English one. There are many, and in fact, probably the majority of English translations of the Quran are archaic English ones because, many of them originated at a point that to be religious in the Western world was to talk with these and thous, even though in ordinary speech, nobody did that. But, it was kind of the religious way of talking. And so as Muslims tried translating their texts into something for English-speaking people, they made the assumption that, that's how you ought to do it. That's a real barrier for me. I prefer a modern English one, and the two that I have here today are that kind of thing. These two are relatively cheap, or you can get it free online through the website mentioned there. Well, once you've got a text, where do you begin? Well, there's really no one answer for that. The easiest kind of thing is, you start at the beginning. Chapter 1, verse 1. And because obviously that's the way that the Quran has come to people. That's the way Muslims frequently deal with it. Another possibility is, and you start reading. That's something that many people do. Or another possibility is to do it the way, historically speaking, Muslims originally dealt with things, namely the passages received by Muhammad earliest were the ones they encountered. That's how they learned the Quran. It wasn't until much later that they start seeing things in a different kind of order. I mentioned that the Quran began coming down to Muhammad in 610 until his death in 632. But within this, there are two types of passages in the Quran. Passages that are viewed as Meccan chapters, Meccan surahs, things that were revealed while the Muslim community was in Mecca. And then the Medinan surahs that occurred after a momentous event within the early Muslim community, namely the Hijrah, the emigration of Muslims from Mecca to Medina. In Mecca, Muslims were a persecuted minority. They had no political power at all, and they suffered immensely. There were agreements by their neighbors not to sell to them, not to allow them to obtain the necessities of life. And it was during that Meccan period that Muhammad's wife, with whom he lived monogamously for the majority of his life, she died. And apparently because of the lack of food that she was able to receive. The Medinan passages, okay, and the reason that there was a move from Mecca to Medina was that in a city called Yathrib, subsequently renamed to Medina, the city of the Prophet, Muhammad had been invited to lead the Yathrib community, Medinan community, which had competing tribes, competing factions. And what occurred with that movement from Mecca to Medina was that for the first time, the vision provided in the Quran could be put into societal practice. And thus, 622, the year of the Hijrah, that's viewed as the first year, the beginning of the Muslim calendar. Not the start of when the Quran starts to be received, but when it first can be put into practice as a society. There are differences in the chapters written during these two periods. In the Meccan period, the focus is on God's oneness, heavy emphasis on moral and ethical behavior, emphasis on the certainty of the resurrection, of God's judgment, focus on the garden or paradise, the fire, emphasis on what prophethood is and Prophet Muhammad's connections with previous prophets. In the Medinan materials, those emphases certainly continue, but a lot of the Medinan materials is really heavily focused on various societal issues. Okay, issues about marriage and divorce, commerce, finance, relationships with other communities, war, peace, these practical things that go on with political situations. Now, we find the Meccan materials, hey, that's really focusing on the core themes of the Quran. That material tends to be much shorter. The Medinan materials Well, you really can't understand those without those core themes. The core themes are present in Medina materials, but because there's all this other stuff, for an outsider, that kind of gets lost in the shuffle. And thus, my suggestion is that, it makes the greatest amount of sense for outsiders such as myself to read materials that can be more easily digested and get at the heart of what the Quran's message is. Also, with all of those specific societal, legal kinds of issues, it takes a lot of background information in order to understand what's going on. And in the Quran, okay, after the very first surah, which is an introduction, less than 1 page, 7 verses, you have the next surah titled The Cow, 286 verses, and you're wading through all of this legal material. And frankly, a lot of outsiders simply give up at that point. Thus, I suggest starting with the Meccan materials, and thus to read the first surah, then jump to surah 67. Remember I talked about juz, these sections, 1/30 of the Quran. Juz 29 and juz 30. You start with those, which starts at surah 67. Read to the end of the Quran, then go back and pick up the other stuff. Once you have your bearings written or sorted out. If you're going to read through the Quran a second time, switch it up, maybe take it from the beginning. But that's I found a more productive way of dealing. Yes.
It's like you reference the certainty of resurrection
Yes.
from my Christians. I think of the resurrection of Christ. Can you tell me if I'm on the right path, or is it everybody?
You're on the right path and you're way off. Because Jesus' resurrection in the New Testament is understood as being the beginning of resurrection for others, not a singular thing that makes Jesus special. And Jesus, the only one who deals with that. Too bad about the rest of us. No, the Quran is talking about the resurrection of all humanity at the end of the age. Okay. And the certainty of resurrection and the certainty of God's judgment these are very, very important things, primarily because they're talking about the need for human accountability in Arab society, which had no concept of resurrection or God's judgment or accountability in any ultimate sense for one's behaviors. You do what you want. And with that, one of the key challenges that Muhammad was facing, and which the Quran provided, was a way of indicating to society what you do morally, ethically, does matter. Now, how one talks about that can differ in a number of ways. The Quran presents things in one kind of way, and I may have problems with dealing with that particular way of talking about accountability. That may not be the way in which I think about it, but yes, I think it makes a difference how we act in dealing with other people. How do I demonstrate that? Well, I don't have a good set of arguments for that. Resurrection and God's judgment were ways of underscoring the absolute importance of what people did individually and as a society in terms of how they treat other people. And one way or another, I suggest that Christians and Muslims share a great deal at that point, even if, how do we go about convincing someone else of that? That may be a very difficult kind of thing, but I can at least appreciate what's happening in the Quran when I see those kind of emphases that are there. It was a very good question. Any other questions before we move on? Surah 1, the very beginning of the Quran, says this: in the name of God, the most compassionate, most merciful. All praise is for God, Lord of all worlds, the most compassionate, most merciful, master of the day of judgment. You alone we worship, and you alone we ask for help. Guide us along the straight path, the path of those you have blessed, not those you were displeased with, or those who are astray. As part of one's reading of the Quran, the first surah is a necessary part of whatever you're dealing with. And it's especially important because, every time in the 5 prayers each day, you take those 5 prayers together, okay, the first surah occurs at least twice, is read at least twice, is prayed at least twice in every one of those prayers, and sometimes more than twice. For a total of 17 times during the day, these words in Arabic are prayed. It's that important. It's kind of like the Lord's Prayer in Christian circles, only multiplied many times over, because it's used far more frequently than the Lord's Prayer is. Yes.
Sound like God talking to you, Muhammad.
Very good. Good observation. Because God is providing the prayer, giving voice to the prayer of each individual human, if it's understood. And notice there's a shift from third person language in the first half of the prayer, and then second person language in talking about you in the second part of the prayer. This is understood as basically the plight of humanity. What people need, according to Islam, is not somebody to save them from their sin. What they need is guidance. The problem with humanity is that they're forgetful. They're weak. They need reminders. They need to be guided. And thus, to be guided, to remind them 17 times every day that that's what's necessary. Yes, you have that. If you continue on into the next surah, the very first verses of that surah then indicate, you need guidance? This is it. Okay, that's what the function of the Quran is. And basically, that second surah functions as an answer to this prayer from humanity. But, in the Christian New Testament, in Romans chapter 8, there is a reference to humans in the midst of their situation, not even being able to give voice to what they need. And Romans chapter 8 talks about the Spirit. Okay, when all we've got are groans, inexpressible groans, the Spirit prays the prayer for us, makes the connection for us. It's very much that same kind of imagery that we have here with the first surah. God has provided a way of saying what we on our own usually don't. What? You need guidance? Hey, you've got to be kidding. It's a very different thing. In Muslim prayer, using one's own words in addition to the prayers that are provided here, that's always permissible, but you always are expected to use these materials. And if you ever visit a prayer service at AMI, both before, after the service, you will see Muslims going through the various prayer movements and so on, before and after the communal prayer. And hey, they're praying about, dad being sick. They're praying about the particular concern for peace in Gaza. They're praying about the various concerns of the world. These aren't an either or kind of thing. Hey, they're both and the prayers that are provided in the Quran, okay, are a way of basically providing a model of the kinds of concerns that a person should have. There are all sorts of surprises that occur when we pick up the Quran and read it. The organization of the Quran is unlike the organization of the Bible. The Bible provides kind of a universal history from creation to culmination. No, not in the Quran. If you want to find out about creation, there are all sorts of places in the Quran that deal with that. But no, it's not going to be in the beginning of the book. The Quran, especially compared to the Bible, has very, very few stories. There are stories there, but comparatively speaking, there are very few stories, but there are a lot of references to stories that will refer to a particular story, and it may refer to characters that we happen to know from the Bible, but no, it doesn't tell the story. Okay, it is dealing with things that were already present in culture and not necessarily stories that matched what we have in the Bible. But and particularly when we look at some of these stories in that do get told in the Quran, things that we do also find in the Bible, the stories are often told for a different kind of purpose, to make a different kind of point. But that will kind of jerk your head around when you encounter that as an outsider reading. Quran isn't organized around Muhammad's life story or activities, or the history of the Arab people. The material isn't thematically organized. And very often it's very, very repetitive. You keep encountering themes all the way through, not just in one spot. Basically, the Quran is organized from longest to shortest surah, with the exception of the first surah. The content itself kind of jumps around, which is one of the reasons why I'm going to read here today. This works because wherever you happen to start in the Quran, I can guarantee that within 10 pages, you are going to encounter virtually all of the major themes of the Quran. They're going to occur there. No matter where you have started. But it's just not arranged the way I would have arranged it if I were doing this. The key thing, don't try to make things fit our outsider expectations. Watching the clock here. Each surah has a title. I suggest you ignore the titles. The titles are in Arabic. The English translations of the titles often make no sense whatsoever. The second surah, the cow. No, this isn't on animal husbandry. It's referring to a particular incident that is tucked in the middle of this surah, an incident about a cow, and it's kind of a funny incident. Got a great sense of humor in it, but no, that's not what the surah as a whole is about. We're accustomed that when we see a title, oh, that must be what this chapter is about. No, just forget it. And thus, I suggest ignoring the titles. Imam Ibrahim is marvelous in terms of how he talks about the materials in the Quran. I have been in many mosque sermons where a passage will be referred to only by its Arabic title. I have no idea where that material is coming from. Imam Ibrahim will say, chapter 3, verse 9. Oh, okay. And I always carry a piece of paper with me over there. And either I remember, and right after the service, I write down the passage if I want to look this stuff up, or I write it down right away to be able to look at that material later in terms of what his sermon was doing.
That's because you don't have it memorized.
Yes. Okay. Another important oddity, and we've already alluded to this somewhat. It's kind of odd how God talks about God's self, and some of you have already pointed out this. Whenever you see the word God in an English translation of the Quran, it's the word Allah. The God. Allah. The God. Not the Muslim God, as opposed to the Christian God or the Jewish God. The God. There is only one God. There are many names of God. Traditionally, Muslims will talk about the 99 names of God. There are actually more than 99 names in the Quran. And some of the things that appear in lists of the 99 names of God are not in the Quran. But it's important to recognize that, those names are basically attributes of God. Creator, ruler, destroyer. That's an interesting one. Sustainer. Okay, they're functions of God. They're the ways in which we encounter God. We encounter God through God's names. And by inclusion of names that, we might associate with some rather strange things, such as destruction, God is understood as being involved in everything. Absolutely everything. You don't need to call God into a circumstance. God is there. God is involved already. And thus, God's involvement in periods of grief, in times of tragedy, in times of prosperity. Okay, those are all involved in terms of how God is talked about. The oneness of God is a major theme. There is one God. How many gods are there? Okay, count them. One. Ah, good. But more importantly, God is in a category of one. Nothing else is in the category. God is unlike anything else. And that's something that, hey, is also true in Christian theology, but most Christians ignore that. We basically make God in our own image. One of my professors from long ago talked about God made humanity in God's image, and humans have been returning a compliment ever since. With this, nothing is like God. We are speechless in terms of trying to talk about God. God is more than our words are capable of dealing with. That becomes, in emphasizing the oneness of God, it thus becomes really shocking for we outsiders reading the Qur'an to find places where all of a sudden God, speaking of God's self, says, we. And this is understood as being the royal we, or the we of majesty. It's not that, really, Muslims are secret Trinitarians. No. But simply dealing with that real greatness, the superlative expression of God. And what is striking in the Quran is that as you move, sometimes even within the same verse or in adjacent verses, you will have we, and then God speaking of God's self as I, or as he, or as the compassion, or some other thing. Okay, we're jerked around in terms of how God is talked about. And the function of that is that it always keeps us off balance. It makes it absolutely impossible to get an image of God, a way in which we think, gotcha. No, God is always one. I'm going to stop at this point, and if there's some really pressing kind of question, we'll deal with that. Yes.
Was anybody trying to perpetuate the word that Muhammad heard?
The perpetuating of the Quran is done by the Muslim community in their prayer life. That's how the Quran, there in the beginning, when the prophet died, that was a major blow. Hey, you got the prophet there, you have questions, you ask the prophet. But when the prophet died, that was a major crisis for the community. And in the first caliph, the first leader of the community after Muhammad's death, he went about the process of gathering various things that people had written down on shoulder bones of candles or scraps of bark, various ways that people had written down things, and dealing with people who remembered, oh, this is what we always said in prayer. This is what said, okay, Abu Bakr, the first caliph, made the first collection of those things. But by the third caliph, they recognized that, okay, as the Muslim community had spread, okay, we've got to have a handle on this. And thus, within less than 25 years after Muhammad's death, the text, basically the way we have it now in Arabic, was established. And it was a process of dealing with, yes, communal memories, things written down, etc. Just to give you an idea, from the point the revealing of the Qur'an began until the time there was a fixed text was less than 50 years. For the New Testament, from the point things started to be written down until the canonization of, the 27 books we have in the New Testament, no more, no less. 350 years. And, okay, we possess between 5,500 and 6,000 handwritten manuscripts of all or part of New Testament books. No two of those are exactly alike. For Muslim community, the text was fixed within less than 50 years. So,
The Sunnis and the Shiites?
yes, the Sunnis and Shias agree on the text of the Quran. They disagree on certain interpretations of it. But yes, the text is the same. Yes.
So I remember the Imam talking about the previous Imam, a secondary bunch of readings that were, or writings that were either people close to, or that Muhammad had said that people close to him had said, or people heard him say, or something like that. There was like a step away. Is that included in the Quran, or is that a separate?
That is a separate thing. That's called the Sunnah. And the various reports of things that that Muhammad said or did, there are actually approximately 600,000 of these separate traditions. 1% of those, Muslim scholars have said 1%, okay, these are sound. They're sahih. They are the ones that can be depended upon for making legal decisions, etc. But no, that material is not part of the Quran at all. Many practices in terms of how Muslims live their lives, etc., they come from the traditions, the Sunnah of the Prophet. Why does the Imam sit down halfway through the sermon every time and then get up and start again? The Prophet did that. Okay. Why are there 5 prayers? Oh, that's what the Prophet did. Okay, that's not described in the Quran. That's not specified in the Quran. Much of the information comes from that aspect. But yeah, that's a separate source of practice within the life of the community. Thank you so much for your being here today. Next week, Next week, Imam Ibrahim will be with us. I hope he will be able to be with us. I've been looking forward to his being here. And as a little bonus, discovered in the C10, C10 or one of the other communications from Countryside this week. This summer in July, I believe, he's going to be preaching here at Countryside as well, in our worship, as will Rabbi Sharf from Temple Israel. So great opportunities. Get to know the Imam. Thanks again for being. Take care.